Does the Greek word authenteo really mean to dominate or usurp authority? Have modern committee translations of 1 Timothy 2 made a mistake? Let's explore. A previous upload, you may have seen, made reference to a passage from 1 Timothy 2 and quoted from the English Standard Version, "I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man." This translation follows the most widely distributed New International Version and other committee translations that are in fact now disputed along the lines that the word translated exercise authority should be understood in a negative sense. It's not that a woman may not exercise authority over a man, but that she may not dominate him through false teaching. Or alternately, she may not usurp the present authority in order to gain it for herself. Nevertheless, it is said, she may exercise authority over a man through proper teaching, or else gain authority which is properly bestowed by elders. The Australian scholar Michael Bird favours the negative reading with the thought that authenteo probably has a negative connotation given its usage in other literature and from the context here in particular. In support, he cites the church father John Chrysostom's advice to husbands: do not be despotic or domineer the wife. Now, is authenteo an inherently negative word? Other Christians of the ecclesiastical era, in fact, used it in reference to God the Father. And yet you may have heard the claim that prior to the late 2nd century, authenteo assumed a negative meaning, and that the ecclesiastical writers, by the end of the 2nd century, misunderstood the word and took it to mean exercising authority. Leyland Wilshire opines, "I would have to say here that the Greek early church accidentally misread the word to the detriment of the church future and universal." Among the 6 to 8 attested uses of the word prior to 1 Timothy, the positive or neutral use of the word, and in relation to authority, appears most conspicuously in a letter attributed to Tryphon, which is dated from 27 to 26 BC. Tryphon was a senior official of the Roman taxation bureaucracy and had authority over a tax farmer who had imposed a lease on Tryphon's friend at a higher rate of rent than before. Tryphon, in the letter, overruled the tax farmer and granted his friend the same rent as before. He writes, "Since I had authority with respect to him, he," that is the tax farmer, "immediately granted a concession to make a profit at the same rent." The key here is that Tryphon used authenteo of himself, however one may otherwise translate the word in this text. And in the absence of any confession of guilt or wrongdoing, Tryphon more plausibly used authenteo in a non-pejorative or non-derisive way about himself and his actions. The action of authenteo could then be regarded in a positive or neutral sense, at least among the profane or secular writings. Was it so among Christians? We have seen from Dr. Bird that Chrysostom forbade Christian husbands to be despotic or domineer the wife. Chrysostom elsewhere states, however, "And how can Paul say, 'But I do not permit a woman to teach nor to have authority over a man'? This applies," he says, "when the man also holds the same faith. But when the man is an unbeliever and deceived, Paul does not deprive her the authority of teaching." The link Chrysostom draws between the verb authenteo and the clearly positive authority of instruction towards the unbelieving husband suggests a non-pejorative sense in which Chrysostom understood both terms. The example from Chrysostom that Dr. Bird cites must not then indicate a negative connotation of the word authenteo itself, but rather that Chrysostom regarded the conduct associated with it as inappropriate for the marriage context. Another positive use of authenteo by a Christian is from the Greek-speaking Origen, who regarded Paul's teaching in 1 Timothy 2 as a rather secure statement about the woman not being the man's leader in the word. Authenteo is here linked with leadership in the ministry of the word, which is ordinarily a good thing. Now, if the inherent meaning of authenteo bears no suggestion of a misuse of authority or improper assumption of authority, what do other factors suggest? A key clue that Paul used authenteo with a positive exercise of authority in mind, is understood from the grammatical structure of 1 Timothy 2. You can read about this in some detail in chapter 3 of Women in the Church, the 3rd edition. I'll leave a link to this in the description below. Here's the technical summary. When the Greek conjunction ouder joins two verbal activities that are each governed by a negated finite verb, both verbal activities are either regarded positively or negatively by the author. Shall we say that again? When the Greek conjunction ouder joins two verbal activities that are each governed by a negated finite verb, both verbal activities are either positively or negatively regarded by the author, with the allowance perhaps that one activity may be neutral rather than positive or negative. This holds throughout the New Testament. The question we want to ask then is whether the word translated to teach here is positive or negative in Paul's view, since that will inform the meaning of the other verbal activity that authenteo conveys. The egalitarian view often reads this in terms of false teaching. I do not permit a woman by false teaching to dominate a man. In fact, however, whenever a believing author in the New Testament uses this Greek word, didasko, of another believer, without the accompaniment of indicators as to what is being taught or the manner in which the teaching occurs, it always conveys a positive exercise of instruction. In other words, if a Christian mentions teaching with respect to the activity of a fellow believer in the New Testament, without mention as to what they taught, that is, the teaching content, or the mode or manner in which they taught, the Christian author always uses didasko to convey a positive activity. Context makes this clear. Furthermore, Paul elsewhere refers to false teaching with the word heterodidaskaleo in the letter of 1 Timothy. He says, charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine, and if anyone teaches a different doctrine and does not agree with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ and with a teaching that accords with godliness, he is puffed up with conceit and understands nothing. Hence, the paired infinitive authenteo, which bears no inherently negative meaning in either the secular or Christian literature, is to be understood as positive in nature also. A woman may not exercise authority in a positive way over a man in deference to the created order, a point which Paul makes in the verse to follow.